I'm Ben Labadie, your host for Your Vote, and I'm here with the Conservative candidate for Chatham-Kent-Leamington, Dave Epp. Dave, how's everything going? And give us some opening remarks.
Morning, Ben, and thanks to YourTV for hosting this segment. It's going well out there. I am honored by all the volunteers that I've got working with us. However, when we're at the doors, the majority of Canadians don't want me to be here today. They don't want an election. You know what? They're right. We've been in a minority parliament for almost 2 years. There's 2 more years in this mandate. We're sitting in the 4th wave of a pandemic. We're in the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression, even worse than the global recession of 2007 and 2008. Canadians are experiencing skyrocketing costs for food, gas, shelter, professional service, lumber, all kinds of things. And our kids, they're inheriting an economic tragedy in a very divided country. You know, under our parliamentary system, this mandate could have continued for another 2 years before we would have had an election. As Conservatives, we could have continued to serve Canadians by critiquing legislation and improving it. But the Liberals want a blank check to steal a majority in the middle of summer. This election is based on opportunism, not about making life better for Chatham-Kent-Leamington or for Canadians in general. We should be focused on opportunity for Canadians, not opportunism. And that's what we see here locally as well.
Okay.
As Conservatives, we've got a plan, and we'll get to that, I'm sure, in the coming questions and in the coming days.
Yeah, we have a couple questions here.
Fire away.
So let's get to it. The first question, local businesses have taken a huge hit over the last year and a half because of the pandemic. How will you support the economy, both locally and beyond?
Sure. You're absolutely right. The pandemic has hollowed out our main streets and has hammered our small business. The Conservatives, early in this campaign, published a plan, Canada's Recovery Plan, and I'd encourage everyone to go to conservative.ca/plan and read it. Specifically, though, to our plan for small businesses. If you'll recall back at the beginning of the pandemic, the Liberals proposed a support for small business of a 10% wage subsidy. The Conservatives said no way, 75%, because we needed to keep small businesses going so they'd be there now when we need to restart our economic engine. So what are we going to do? We've got a Canada Job Surge plan where we're going to incentivize all new hires between 25 and 50% for 6 months from the new hire. 4 other points for small business, CEBA-like loans, but not capped at $60,000, capped at $200,000 with up to 25% forgivable. A Main Street business loan where there's a 5% tax credit for capital investments going into small businesses on our Main Street. Sorry, that's the Main Street tax credit. And the Main Street Business Accelerator, or the Canada Investment Accelerator, makes the first $25,000 refundable for small businesses. The other thing for the workers, coming back to work, we'll be doubling the Canada Workers Benefit, on average giving about $1 an hour raise through a tax incentive program. We have to shift the philosophy from paying people to stay home to incentivizing employers to bring workers back to work.
Okay. Number 2, keeping up with the pandemic. The issue of vaccinations has become quite polarizing, as you know. Do you believe vaccines should be mandatory for any field? Politicians, those working long-term care and healthcare, or local businesses?
Yeah, it's sad that this issue has been politicized. So let me state for the record that I am fully vaccinated, and I encourage every Canadian that's medically able to get vaccinated. That's the number 1 tool we have to get us out of this pandemic. The question was, should they be mandatory? There's a difference between vaccine mandates and mandatory vaccinations. We have tools at our disposal. If for some reason people can't medically or choose not to, that doesn't absolve them of their responsibility to their federal citizens for public health. But we have tools. We have rapid testing. And so the Conservatives strongly encourage vaccination. And if for whatever reason a person chooses not to, daily rapid testing should avail themselves of federally mandated services.
Okay. Moving on. Number 3. The discovery of unmarked graves and the horrors of Canada's residential school system have been thrust into the spotlight over the last few months. How are you personally and your party as a whole working toward reconciliation with our Indigenous people?
Thank you. Let me start nationally, and then I'll get to personal. It's a tragedy. this has been a tragedy coming for a while. So under the previous Conservative government, we did initiate the Truth and Reconciliation Committee, Commission, not committee, in 2008. They published their 95 findings in 2015. We've had 6 years of Liberal government since then, and they've cherry-picked some of them and left the hard work undone. And so, specifically now to the unmarked graves and the recent tragedies that we as a nation have to come to terms with. Conservatives are fully endorsing full funding for recommendations 71 through 76 dealing with missing and murdered children. Unmarked graves, that needs to be fully funded and a very, very swift timeline. Coming to myself personally, I have a daughter that lives in in Kamloops, where the discovery was initially found at the first. So I did visit the Kamloops Residential School and made my personal condolences and expressed that to band members. But that's just a gesture. Those gestures are symbols, are important, but we have to bring action to it. And that goes across the board. That goes with the two bands that I have here relating to the Caldwells and Moraviantown. Symbols and gestures are important. Photo ops, smooth talking, that doesn't get it done. We can get into drinking water and a whole host of other issues yet. But there has to be action, and Conservatives will follow that up.
Okay, moving on. The environment has been a hot topic in Chatham-Kent this summer with the conversation around woodlot preservation, not to mention flooding of our local waterways and shoreline erosion. What do you see as the most important next step in preserving our environment?
As you know, the Conservatives are taking the environment and climate change very, very seriously, and we've launched our plan. It's right in our book that through the pricing of carbon, that's a bit of a change, that we will address climate change and meet our Paris targets. So when it comes to more local issues, the federal government often has the biggest checkbook, but the solutions must be driven locally through a municipality, up through the province, and then coming to the federal government. We've got a $3 billion fund earmarked for some of the concerns that we have here locally. We need local agreements on what those plans should look like, and then we'll go forward with that. When it comes to the Liberal plan on addressing trees and all that, they promised 2 billion trees in 2019, and I hear they're promising to plant them again. Thus far, 0 trees planted.
Okay. The need for affordable housing has never been greater, especially at a time when the real estate market is going through the roof. How will you ensure everybody in Canada is able to be safely housed and home ownership remains an achievable goal?
Right. So there's two main drivers when it comes to the affordable housing and housing in general. Two of my daughters have purchased or in the process of purchasing houses this summer, and so I know exactly what that market looks like. First of all, supply and demand. We need to increase the supply, which gets at the price. I mean, those basic relationships exist, and so from a federal perspective, we will be putting, we're the largest property owner, building owner in Canada. We've got 37,000 buildings. We will be putting at least 15% of those onto the market to try and increase the supply. On top of that, we'll be looking to reduce more of the regulations around getting more houses built. So certainly that impacts that basic relationship. The other thing we've got going on, and it's began or was increasing through the pandemic, and I expect it unfortunately to continue, is just basic inflation. Lumber pricing, all of those things are driving up the costs of new housing, and so we've got to get our whole economic fiscal house in order to slow inflation.
Okay. All right, being in office requires collaboration. What is your current relationship with the municipal and provincial reps in your riding, and how do you plan to bridge the divide between party loyalties among your constituents once elected?
Sure. So for 5 weeks now, I'm a Conservative candidate for Chatham-Kent-Leamington. Once, for the past 2 years, I've had the honor to be the Member of Parliament, and there I'm the member for all. And so I consider I have good relationships with the municipalities. I interact with 3 of them, Chatham-Kent. So I would represent the lower half of this county, of this municipality, Leamington, and parts of Lakeshore. And so through various issues, we've interacted with all those administrations. Again, many of the issues we face here locally start at the municipal level, and then where the municipality then applies, if it's a large issue, and we certainly have no shortage of those locally,
right,
to the province and then to the feds. So while that process is ongoing, it must be locally driven, but obviously my I wouldn't say my fingers are in it, but my staff and myself are monitoring those issues as they develop so that we're ready to go when those plans are presented to us.
All right, and that's pretty much our time, and I want to thank you for coming on here and sharing with your vote, and just some quick closing remarks.
Sure. Canada's Conservatives are ready. This is a needless election, but because of a minority parliament, we are a government in waiting. So we will serve and we will secure Canadians' future. 5 pillars. First of all, we've got to secure and we'll return the 1 million jobs that were lost during the pandemic. Secondly, secure accountability. We've got to clean up the corruption. We'll be introducing a new act that brings real teeth into ethical lapses in Ottawa. Third, the silent pandemic, the mental health side of this physical pandemic. Canada's National Mental Health Strategy Plan will be funding provinces, because health is a provincial jurisdiction, and encouraging employers to add mental health into their health benefit plans. PPE, critical stockpiles. Never again should we be caught with our pants down, and excuse the expression, into a crisis. Canada will ensure that we are prepared. Then lastly, we've got to bring fiscal responsibility back to our books. We will balance the books over a decade. We can't do it immediately. We don't want to do it immediately because of the crisis we're still in and going through.
All right. Thank you very much, Dave.
Thank you, Ben.